industrial development. We also learned that we need to consult with our traditional knowledge keepers to supplement Western science, as I said in the previous slide. We also need to fast track and develop policies in emergency preparedness and response plans. We were scrambling. Phones were ringing, texts, emails, come to this meeting, come to that meeting. All of a sudden, the consultants come out of the woodwork. Hey, Chief, you know what that's like. And all of a sudden, you talk to 3, 4 different consultants. It's like talking to lawyers about what does Section 35 mean. You get 5, 10 different definitions and interpretations. And then they say, have I got a deal for you? I'll cut you a deal. You got a contract, let's sign this, sign that. So it's just, what I'm getting at, it is very confusing time for those of us who are supposedly public servants and politicians, and definitely not scientists, and definitely not environmental scientists. So it is a very trying time, it still is. We also know we need to develop and fast track our own legislation, regulations and policies. It's really, really urgent. Where my chief and councils have been for the last 50 years, I don't know. We do not have one written piece of legislation in my community. What the hell have they been doing the last 50 years? We also know we need to recognize, this is a new buzzword I learned from one of our chiefs at the FSI Assembly yesterday, we need to recognize and exercise riparian water rights. Google search that, riparian water rights. There's also an urgent need to create a Section 35 compliance office. And I learned this yesterday from a lawyer who's advising our FSI and executive. We need to be aware of the Navigable Water Protection Act. I can barely say that. We need to broaden the definition of environmental effects, as advised by the FSI and legal advisor. That was just yesterday. We also know from my good friend Carol Crow, who's an environmental technician, she has a program called Building Environmental Aboriginal Human Resources, and she quizzed her students. She's had a program in the Prince Albert area this summer, just concluded, I believe, and they're responding to the oil spill because we know that the oil and contaminants move down up the river in that area. And she asked them, read the UN declaration and get back to me and say, how many articles do you think were violated just from that one oil spill alone? And the students came back and said, we know at a minimum there's 11 of those articles were violated. Often wonder how many chief and councils know that outside of this oil spill zone. I hope more do. Prior to this presentation, I also Google searched the Water Security Agency. It just changed its name, but it's a provincial government entity. And our chiefs and our elders have always cautioned us to be careful when you're dealing with a provincially or federally funded agency. If you were to ask 10 chiefs, do you trust this information? Do you trust the information you're getting from the Minister of Indian Affairs? 9 out of 10 times, they're going to say, no damn way. So be careful. Although there's data is out there, it's on the website, I would be very careful. What was interesting reading that website information was the terminology that's now coming out. We're not scientists, and barely graduated from university with an undergrad degree, and I could barely pronounce some of this complex terminology that's coming out, so I would urge you scientists to bear it down a little bit, because you're really baffling us, and you're just making us feel a little nervous and uncomfortable when I can't even pronounce petroleum hydrocarbon, benzene, toluene, ethylene, hexylene, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. Wow, that's pretty cool. When you talk to our elders and you ask and you present this kind of information to them, like polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbon compounds, it's like they're going to say, what's that? It's probably what they say, right? All they'd say is it's poison. They're poisoning us with all these complex chemicals they've been putting into our oil and so on in all those processes. So I would say to the Canadian Council of the Ministers of the Environment, the interim sediment quality guidelines, make it more understandable for us and for our elders. We're not scientists. Here's some photos of collections that were done by some amateurs, non-scientists, if you will, who took a risk and went close to by the riverside, North Saskatchewan River by the Battlefords. And these were on display at a little rally we had in North Battleford just a couple of weeks after that disaster. And I think, Mylan, you were there. I still have them in my truck, by the way, wrapped up and sealed in hydrocarbon. No, just kidding. But the point is, I like to show these samples to show people what's in that system and what's still in that water system. It's not a pleasant sight. We also had a demonstration. I was a little saddened by the lack of numbers and coordination, perhaps. It was an effort, but nonetheless, we could have had more people there, more thought, more planning. But again, the people, the leaders that orchestrated this walk in North Battleford were trying. Right? They're not these expert demonstrators themselves, but they said we have to do something for the community to raise awareness. So we organized, or they organized a walk. I just went along for the ride. But what we did do, what we did really accomplish is that we realized we had support. There weren't a lot of non-Indigenous people walking with us, but they drove by. We held up traffic. That's a scene. We were walking south from the city of North Battleford towards the bridge. We had support from the local police, the RCMP, city police. We did hold up traffic for probably a good hour, and none of them gave us the finger that I recall, but I do recall one older gentleman saying some very slanderous things to us as we walked by. And but the vast majority gave us the thumbs up and a little toot of their horn, I should say. So I think what it did was it at least raised awareness to not just our own people, but to non-Indigenous people, that this issue is not just impacting First Nations, Métis, the Indigenous population, but everybody. What I would recommend in the short time I have and the little time I had to research this complex issue is that we need to, it's obvious, we need to protect and preserve our water. Nippi is sacred. Without that, you'll hear that time and time again, we won't exist, period. It reminds me of a presentation I went to a conference called Breadbasket 2.0 about 5-6 years ago. I was in a room, I was probably the only non-scientist in that room. And after 2 days of presentations and deliberations, they came to a couple conclusions. They agreed unanimously through consensus that A, we were running out of arable land. Number two, we're running out of water. And they asked the question, how in the hell do we expect to feed an extra 1 billion people on this planet when we can barely feed them today? That was about 5 or 6 years ago, and that's always stuck with me. And I've been making a commitment to learn more about this issue ever since. We need a long-term strategy, not short-term band-aid solutions as commented earlier. We need to allow for third-party assessments with the involvement of First Nations or Indigenous communities. We need less ambiguity in our agreements. Learned that from the Wabamun Paul Band, Wabamun oil spill a few years ago. They have these agreements, they come to terms with a government or a corporation, but oftentimes there's ambiguous language, and then 5 years later they end up back in court in disagreement and can't resolve issues because one group believes that phrase or that language meant this when it meant that. We need to use more accredited professionals to support our elders' traditional environmental knowledge and their testimonies. I would also say and recommend that we need strong legal compliance. This is from a recommendation from my friend Carol Crow. We need ongoing monitoring. I understand in Maidstone, in our area, in our backyard, the monitors that were hired and sent out to monitor the river have been pulled off now. And basically Husky saying, from what I'm hearing, it's okay now. You don't have to monitor anymore. My friends from the environmental movement say this is so severe that monitoring should be ongoing for much longer than it has been to this very day. We also need a new adjudicator or a process to resolve disputes, because we will have disputes. We'll have debates on the interpretation of some of our meetings and the outcomes of those meetings and the agreements struck at those meetings. And we also need to establish local river watch groups. It's something we're going to be exploring for our community, and hopefully other communities catch on to that and we can incorporate them into that process. And lastly, we need to rebuild trust. There's been time and time again where trust has been broken, where good intentions have gone sideways. There's been new governments elected, new bureaucrats come along, and they'll interpret that agreement that was signed just yesterday in a different way. And again, so oftentimes we get into this boxing match, but with no referee. And believe me, most First Nations are really, really strapped for financial resources to hire some of the best lawyers and legal counsel that are available. And we just don't have those kind of resources. So we need some way to adjudicate disputes moving forward. Again, off the corporate website, please call this toll-free number. There's actually, you might, I don't know if you'd be lucky if you get a human being on the other end, probably a recording, but that's how they're dealing with us to this very day. I would close by saying we need to learn from these tragedies from the 70s with the Cree of James Bay right up to the issue we have in our own backyard with the Husky oil spill. And also to be aware that the Bill C-38 in many forms were advised may be still alive, although the Harper government is gone. The intent and the ideas to take away the jurisdiction, powers, and authorities of the First Nations communities, Aboriginal communities across Canada, are indeed alive and well. The FSIN has been working on this prior to the oil spill. I came across Resolution 1806, so there have been efforts to address these issues. And I'll close by saying it's all about Nusim Silas. He's now 9 weeks old. And I would say if we don't get our act together, if we don't get better educated, and if we don't get more chiefs, elders, leaders in rooms like this to talk about this urgent and important issue, it is at a crisis level. I don't know what will. What we got to do to get more people out to these forums. I made an effort to be here. I should have been in Yorkton, but I'd rather be here myself, and I will continue advocating for the protection of our Nipi, our sacred waters, and strategies to protect those waters as we move forward, because it's really about not only Nusim Silas, but his children and his children yet unborn. It was in Aspen now.
So I guess we'll go into our group discussion. Lori's rolling up.
I need smoke break. I don't smoke, Lori, but go ahead.
So as we did this morning after the sessions, we wanted to start with a little bit of individual reflection. So you still have some of those green and yellow and orange paper, or green, yellow, and red papers on your table. If not, we have some extra, and Rebecca and some of the students might help to pass them around. So remember, the green ones are ones that you think are important to you. The yellow ones are very important. And the red ones are things that are urgent. We need to do something about these in the next year. We need to start taking some action and getting organized around those in the next year. So let's start with a bit of individual reflection first, and then we'll move on to working with the other people at our table. Thanks.